morning, everyone. We are honored to have Professor Kleinman with us, and he gave an excellent keynote yesterday. And I got a lot of compliment from people who are not only academically stimulated but spiritually inspired. So these sessions will be added into the things that we already learned from Professor Kleinman. The book, The Soul of Care, has been translated into Thai language, and it is already in the second edition. So it's a very welcome book compared to other publications on this kind of topics. I just learned from Professor Kleinman that the book is even more popular in China, partly because the situation of aging society and people are in search of the meaning of care, which seems to be on the one hand very much burdensome, on the other hand so meaningful in shaping human existence. So I will just start with my question asking Professor Kleinman about the kind of things that this book seems to be so popular in many countries, particularly in China. How do you explain it, this kind of phenomena compared to other book which is also quite popular, but this one seems to be even more so?
Thank you for that comment, Professor Komat. Actually, the reason that the book is even understandable in Thai is that Professor Komat has a very good preface to the book, and this book, The Soul of Care, has done very well in China, also in Japan, and in Korea. For the first 6 months that it came out, it was a bestseller. So it did best in Korea, Japan, and China, all those three countries. And I think because care is a very big issue, care of the elderly especially, in those three countries. In Japan in 2040, 40% of the country will be over 65 years of age. In China in 2040, 30% of the country will be over 65 years of age. In the United States at that time, 25% of the country will be over 65 years of age. Worldwide, I think this is a big issue, is aging, and aging brings care in it. So as you age, you're more likely to have chronic diseases and also be vulnerable to acute disease, and such as COVID, for example, and also become affected by cognitive decline, by physical decline, so that you need support, protection, and care. And that's often perceived as a burden by economists. But I think people realize it's much more than that. It's care, I think, and I've said, is the glue that holds society together. If it weren't for care, I think societies would break apart. We take it for granted that care is there, but you can't take it for granted because it is itself vulnerable. So can I show a few slides on the book?
I know that you have this prepared for the presentation, so I'll just let you go through your slides, and afterward we can talk more.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. I wanted to put this book in the context of other books that I've done. My first book was Patients and Healers in the Context of Culture, and that's why that book was why Professor Komat and others came to study with me, because it was the first medical anthropology attempt to interpret the healthcare system differently than the way that health policy and economics and political science professors interpret healthcare. It was to interpretation of healthcare from below, as opposed to interpretation of healthcare from the top. And this is interesting. If you look at the left side, you see the symbol of medicine in the West. The symbol of Western medicine is the rod of Asclepius, which is a winged rod, comes from the Greek times, with a snake wound around it. And but I think that it's an inadequate representation of medicine. I think a much better representation of medicine would be the caduceus of Hermes, which is a winged staff again, but with two snakes wound around. And the significance of that is that Hermes or Mercury represents reciprocity. And I think reciprocity, bao in Chinese, what's the word in Thai for reciprocity? Okay, so I think that is crucial to what care is about. And let me get right onto this. So this is a picture of my wife and I when we were first married in 1965. Okay, so and this was when I was studying to be a psychiatrist, and my wife was a China scholar, and she was studying Chinese. And this was my wife in middle age, and this was the two of us together in our 40s. This is my wife in her 50s. And then just about at this age, when she was 58, she developed early onset Alzheimer's disease. And this is when she was about 62 in our garden. And two things had happened to her from the Alzheimer's at this stage. One, she was losing her memory and her ability to read and work. And two, because her Alzheimer's started in the back of her brain, in the occipital lobe, she was actually becoming blind. So you can't quite see it here, but she doesn't really fully see me because of blindness in this. And this was her a year before she died. She died in 2011. This was 2010. And this was her when she was dying on her, at the last day or two of her life. And our relationship was very close, and the only word she could say at this time was my name, my first name, Arthur. And this is her grave site she was cremated when she died, and her ashes were put in several places, but this is one of them. And this is a beautiful cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is a national historical cemetery, and it has magnificent trees. My wife loved trees, and so this cemetery has beautiful trees. And just around this tree in front over here is a very old maple tree, which is a common tree in New England where we live. And then coming up on the other sides, on both sides, are 4 birch trees, the white trees in America, that she also liked very much. And we tried to find, my adult children and I tried to find the words to summarize her life. And we said beauty, she was a beautiful woman. Wisdom, she was very wise. Goodness, she was committed to doing good. And we thought the most important was love. She was a person who exemplified, embodied love, and that's why I wrote that book. Now, over the last decade, I've experienced 3 losses. One was my wife, the first one. The second one was my mother, but she lived to 102, my mother, okay? She was 102. But she had no mental health problem at all, no cognitive change. In fact, my mother died at 102, and when she was 101, she told me who to vote for in the American elections, okay? She was very politically oriented, my mother, and she wanted to make sure that my vote went to the direction she thought was important, yeah. But this was the third loss, and this was, I've had more than 100 PhD students and more than 250 postdoctoral fellows in my long career of half a century. And some have been outstanding, like Professor Kamat. But this was another outstanding one of my former students who became over time the most visible example in the world of medical humanitarianism. And his name was Paul Farmer. He died 2 years ago at 62 years of age from a high blood pressure and a heart attack. And he died right there in Butaro, Rwanda, where he had built a beautiful hospital, almost as beautiful as this center, okay? Not quite, but quite beautiful and very effective. A major hospital in an extremely rural area of Africa, okay? And Paul also loved trees, and wherever he went, in Haiti, in Africa, he planted trees. And this hospital is surrounded by beautiful trees. Paul was an expert in AIDS, in tuberculosis, and infectious diseases also. So he was a medical anthropologist, infectious disease physician. We were very close. He was extremely close to me because his father died early. I was like a symbolic father to him. And we stayed close until the very end of his life. Actually, at the end of his life, he was my boss because half of my professorship was in his department, and he was the chair of that department. But he represented a kind of care that he gave a name to called accompaniment. And Paul took that term from the Catholic tradition that he was raised in. And the term has a special meaning in a branch of Catholicism called liberation theology. And in that branch, accompaniment means specifically accompanying the poor. And it means being with them while they're suffering, illness or other things, and being with them not for a short while, but for a longer period of time. So that the accompaniment is meant to improve their lives, to help them, but also to stay with them as a kind of or spiritual solidarity. And Paul and I taught some courses together. As you can see, he was the warm and fuzzy fellow, and I was the tough professor. And I talked about this the other day. I'm not going to repeat it. These, I think, are the important dimensions of care: presence, rituals and habits, enduring human development process of care, and caring for memories. And of these, I just want to point to 3 points. One, that the initial aspect of care is a moral exchange. I take this from the great French theologian, philosopher, Emmanuel Levinas, who said that in any face-to-face relationship, it's the acknowledgement and affirmation of the other person that's the critical ethical act. And it is the first act. So Levinas said that in a human interaction, ethics precedes epistemology or cognition. Before you engage in a medical discussion of what's wrong with you, how can I help you, you begin with the ethical act of recognition, respect, affirmation, and acknowledgement. The second thing I want to emphasize here is this presence being our deeply human presence. I think there's something about the gracefulness and the beauty of Thai society that when you acknowledge the other, you're also bringing presence to them, and they're bringing it from you. And then the third point I want to emphasize maybe is not a point that goes over so well with young people, okay? You have to be older to appreciate this. And that's the idea of enduring. I'm 83 years of age, and I work in China. And when I think of a Chinese person my age, 83, that person went through the terrible experience of the Second World War, where in China, 20 million Chinese were killed and 250 million were uprooted. That person went through the Civil War in China, where millions more were killed and uprooted. That person went through the Korean War. In the Korean War, Americans, I'm an American, we lost 58,000 men in the Korean War. The Chinese had 1 million casualties in the Korean War, okay, compared to 58,000 Americans. That person was my in China lived through the Great Leap Forward, which was a disastrous, maybe the world's most disastrous political policy, where under radical Maoism, China tried to go from an agrarian society to an urban society overnight, and created a disaster that killed 40 million Chinese, most of them peasants, most of them farmers. And then that same person, 83 years of age, went through the Cultural Revolution, which was a time of complete chaos in China. So for that person today, as an old person like me, the issue is endure. So actually, aging for them, the problems of old age, are not as difficult as the problems they went through at earlier stages. The notion of enduring, of learning to endure, I think is critical in the aging field. And that many generations, especially young people, at least it's true of my country, and I think also of China, people have not learned to endure. And it's a different issue. No, I don't think it's actually working. Okay. All right, so those are the points I wanted to make. Let me go quickly through this. So caring is a human developmental process. most care in the world is given by women. Perhaps a dimension of that is biological, but the larger dimension is a social construction. That's the way that women are raised in society. The expectation is that women will do the care. But actually, why should the burden be on women? As women enter the workforce now and become professionals, etc., they're not at home to do the caring. There's a responsibility for men, not just a social responsibility, but a moral responsibility to do caring. But you see a very slow uptake in men participating in the care. So my book was about me learning to give care, because when I was young, I was raised differently than girls my age. Girls my age in New York City, when I was young, were raised with the idea that they needed to be careful. I was raised with the idea of a kind of wanton carelessness. I could be as careless as I wanted to be, okay? I didn't have to be careful. That distinction is exactly what care is about. If you're not concerned, if you're not careful, if you're not worried, you're not going to be giving care. You're going to be the opposite. A great example of this in my time, the best example of the anti-care, the opposite of care, the danger of a masculinity that is wantonly careless, is Trump, okay? He represents everything, in my view, that is the opposite of care, okay? And also a toxic masculinity, okay? All right. So, but I think today in the world, there's an emphasis to try to balance care more. And indeed, in Europe, in the United States, we see some change in this regard of men taking more action and care. But this will happen in places where there's financial support for caregiving. So when you go to Australia today, you see many men pushing baby carriages. They're usually pushing them in the direction of coffee shops to have coffee, okay? And in fact, in Australia, not for a baby, but for a toddler, you can get a thing called a baby cappuccino, okay? No coffee, but sort of whipped milk. And that's because they're being paid. The young males are being paid to do the care. And so one of the things I believe in is, in the future, I think we need to pay women for uncompensated care. It's particularly true in my society. We have research that shows that if only 10% of women stopped caring for the elderly, it would overwhelm every single American institution. Nursing homes, hospitals, clinics would be overwhelmed. So we need to pay for the uncompensated care. I won't talk so much about challenges, but there are big challenges today. And the biggest one is, for poor people, is the absence of long-term care insurance to pay for some nursing assistance, the ability to take care of someone at home in the family. And then this is an important idea I want to leave with you. This is an audience, I hope, has a lot of researchers, social science researchers. We don't measure care, believe it or not. We do not measure care. So you see all these claims by hospitals, even great hospitals. You have some great hospitals in Bangkok. The last time I visited Bangkok, here. I had an infection in my ear, and Dr. Kumar took me to a hospital, in the emergency room, got a perfect treatment, okay? But you don't measure, no country measures care, okay? What we measure is institutional efficiency, and we call it care, but it's not care. Institutional efficiency is the speed and cost of treating X number of patients with Y conditions with X outcome, okay? That is not care, measuring care. That's measuring efficiency. Efficiency is important, but we've made it so important that we don't deal with care at all. We need to make care central and efficiency equal to care, but not dominating care. And the way we would have to measure care, we'd have to measure the amount of time that a doctor or a nurse or a family member spends with the patient. We don't measure any of that. We would measure also the time and quality of communication, I just came from China and via Taiwan to Bangkok, this beautiful city. And when I was in Shanghai, I collected some data, which shows no change from the last time I was there collecting data. In an afternoon clinic in a hospital, one of their great hospitals, just like you have great hospitals here, Ramatipiti and Chula Hospital and all the others. In an afternoon in China, let's say in an internal medicine clinic, you have a professor, you have 2 assistant professors, you have 2 postdoctoral fellows, and maybe 3 or 4 residents. So altogether, 6 or 7 people, okay? They see 500 patients in 2.5 hours, okay? It's impossible to see 500 patients in 2.5 hours. That means somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes per patient, okay? 3 to 5 minutes. Probably for some patients, it means 2 minutes, okay? Maybe even 1 minute, okay? So you can't give good care in that time constraint is impossible. But it's actually happening all over the world now. And in my society, where bureaucracy, but particularly big business, has taken over healthcare. So in my society, the hedge funds and the people who are in global equity and in investment banking, they have taken over private medicine, and they are now talking about, and this is exactly the word they use, throughput, okay? Throughput would be like for boxes. If you had a box company, okay, you'd measure what the throughput of boxes were in an hour, okay? We do 10,000 boxes in an hour, okay? Now they use that for patients, the throughput of patients, okay? Which robs the patients not only of their humanity, but also puts them and puts the doctor into something that's like a factory, okay? In which it's the efficiency that matters, nothing else. And so this has become for us a huge problem. I'll just point to, I make this really short now. There are 3 paradoxes when it comes to care and medicine. You may or may not be interested in the medicine side. The first is the paradox of caregiving in today's medicine The second is the paradox of medical education and caregiving in medical education. And the third is the relationship of caregiving to technology, technologies that were supposed to increase the quality of care, but have become problems for it. So the first paradox is that medicine claims all over the world that care is central to what it does. But if you actually measure the time that doctors spend with patients, it's gone lower and lower. So the care has taken on less of a significance in medicine. Actually, in my country, the situation is so bad that we even see nursing time with patients reduced, as nurses are thought now in America more like managers of care. So they're filling out questionnaires, they're gathering questionnaires, they're working on computers. They spend much less time with patients. It's hospital aides, home health aides, nursing assistants who spend the time with patients. So the paradox is that medicine spends little time on care, and yet it says that it's important. The second paradox, do we have any medical students here? Are there any medical students in the audience? Maybe not. Okay, one. We see one. That's good. So this is the paradox of care in American medicine, that the beginning medical students are better at the psychological and social aspects of care, like taking a good history, like having a warm relationship with a patient, than our fourth-year medical students. So that's interesting. That suggests that while medical students are learning science and technology, which fortunately they are, something toxic is happening on the caregiving side, where they're being de-skilled in caregiving. So it's not good. And the third thing is that technology, which should actually contribute to caregiving, has been a bust in a lot of medicine. And the biggest example of this in America is the electronic health record, or the electronic medical record, which has the potential to do many, many good things. But in America, it's reduced now to doing only one thing, which is billing. It's very good at billing. So you can be sure if you go to an American hospital or clinic and you have an electronic health record, you're going to receive a bill. Okay. And so there are things that can be done. We can improve long-term care insurance for the poor. We can increase support for family care by compensating family care. We can strengthen the training of the doctor. We can improve healthcare systems so they don't cause doctors to burn out and don't create throughput rather than good care. Let me skip these. This is maybe the most important thing I'll show you today, and we'll soon end. This is a fundamental critique of the way public health is organized from an anthropological critique perspective, okay? And this was Paul Farmer's main point, that we should reject socialization for scarcity as part of public health. That is, in the 1990s, socialization for scarcity meant that if you were in America or Europe, you could receive treatment for AIDS. But if you were in Africa or in the poorest Asian societies, you could not receive treatment. You would get prevention. Okay? Paul Farmer felt this was so unequal such an example of health inequality. It was unacceptable. It was unacceptable. And he showed, in very careful research, in Haiti and in Africa, that you could almost always mobilize resources so that poor people could be delivered high technology care with outcomes the same as in rich societies. And I think that the time has come now for all of us to reject the idea of socialization for scarcity. That is, one of Paul Farmer's major points, I'm going to get to in a minute, is that the problem of the world is that some people are considered lesser, less deserving, less valuable. That's unacceptable. In our world, totally unacceptable. So I'll just, I'm trying to develop, you may wonder, why is an 83-year-old guy here in speaking to you? Why am I writing books? I should be out playing golf, right? Or you know, eating pad thai or something, okay? But I'm here because I want to see a moral movement around the world. I want to see a movement for care where we demand high quality care and we resist all the forces that are doing the opposite. And this is the basis for what I'm trying to contribute to. Aristotle said, moral excellence comes about as a result of habit. We become just by doing just acts, temperate by doing temperate acts, brave by doing brave acts. And I believe we become caring by actually doing the acts of care. By doing the care, that's where we become caring. Paul Farmer said, for me, an area of moral clarity is you're in front of someone who's suffering, and you have the tools at your disposal to alleviate that suffering or even eradicate it, and you act. Okay, well, I think I presented what I tried to say in the Soul of Care, and why I hope that you, the younger generation, will carry on a moral movement for care. Thank you.
So we still have a lot of times for the discussions and the Q&A. I think a lot of you would probably have questions either about the book, about the ideas of how to create this global movement for moral care, or even some of a more personal experience of Professor Kleinman. All questions are welcome. Any of you? Yes, please.
Hi, Professor. Actually, I listened to your talk yesterday, right? It's mingled with my own experience. My grandma she passed away, stroke, and she was there on the bed unconsciously for 4 years, right? So my brother had to quit the job to take care of her, right? So and now in Thailand we are approaching the aging society, right? And the debate that's on Facebook here and there is that there's a big debate like, should the young generation like me or my brother quit the job and go take care of the old people or sick people in the family, or they should pursue their career? So for me it's a big dilemma. If you don't quit the job and take care of your family, you might be considered like unethical, right? So the question for me to you is that what is your take on this? Like, how do we cope with this situation between going back to take care, spend time of care, right? And should we, as young generation, to pursue our career?
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
That's a great question. Thank you very much for that. So look at my situation when I took care of my wife at home for 10 years, okay? I couldn't have done that if I had to quit my job, okay? But I had health insurance that was sufficient to be able for me to hire for part of each day a home health aide who was superb and worked closely with my wife. And I could go to, at least for part of every day, I could go, the 5 days of the work week, I could go to work, okay? So that comes out of what's called long-term care insurance. Okay? In my country, very few Americans have long-term care insurance. Only the very well-to-do. And the reason for that is that insurance companies lose money on long-term care insurance. They don't make money on it. So they make the premium very high for them. And since we have a minimal government involvement in health insurance in America, you have to buy that insurance yourself. It's all private, and very few Americans are able to do that. That puts a tremendous pressure, financial pressure, on families when an elderly person requires considerable care. Just to tell you how expensive this is. I took care of my wife for 10 years, but the last 9 months of her life, I really was not able to take very good care of her because she became increasingly paralyzed. She couldn't walk, she couldn't stand up, and I had trouble lifting her, etc. So she had to go to a nursing home for the last 9 months of her life. Those 9 months cost me $150,000 US for 9 months. Most Americans could not pay something like that, okay? Now, if we were Japanese, if we were Norwegians, if we were Finns, if we were Swedes, if we were Danish, if we were Germans, if we were Dutch, all those countries, I don't know about your country, but all those countries provide long-term care insurance for their population. Now, in the future, of course, the question is, can they continue? I think probably it's impossible for Japan to continue with that because they're going to have 40% of the population who will be elderly and vulnerable, and only 60% of the population, well, even less, because if you discount children, it'll be around 50% or less who will be able to work, and for the other part of the population. So this is going to get more and more difficult to do long-term care insurance. If you're in my country, the United States, you read a lot of bad things about China, okay? But I can tell you, China is trying to do something really important in this area. They're trying to provide long-term care insurance even to the poorest people in rural areas. Okay? Now, they're not trying to provide long-term care insurance at the highest level because they couldn't afford that. But it's an interesting level that they're trying to give that support. So, and the reason for that is that in China today, one of the most common reasons for going bankrupt is serious illness in an elderly person, okay? And secondly, in China today, the highest suicide rates are amongst rural elderly. And the main reason for suicide is rural elderly who develop a serious illness, do not want it to affect the family so that the family becomes poor or poorer, and hence take their own life in that regard. So my answer to this is that, you know, every society needs to begin to build long-term care insurance and help the families in every way possible. So I'm sure your society, like almost every society in the world today, is planning on aging at home, okay? Aging at home. Because the alternative would be an unbelievably expensive set of institutions for aging. Plus, most people want to age at home, okay? But you need to give supports. You can't ask people like yourself to quit your job and take care of your family member, because then your family member will have no income in that setting. So you must be compensated for care in some way. If you're going to emphasize aging at home, you must compensate people for care for the elderly. Now that doesn't entirely settle your question. And if you don't have those supports, then what responsibility do the young have to the elderly? I believe this is one of the most important political issues worldwide today. The elderly, and I'm an example, have much of society's wealth, and they also have the greatest needs. The young in many areas of the world are faced with reduced opportunities for jobs and greater pressure on limited finances. What will be the trade-off in policy between the elderly and the young going forward? There's going to have to be some kind of trade-offs in this regard.
Let me just jump in here. I did a research visiting about 100 families with elders who are sick and need long-term care at home. And among a number of findings, one seems to be very common in many families. There are family members that take care of their elders who are bedridden. But most of the cases, it was those who are rather comparatively uneducated, doesn't have high education, or doesn't have a secure career, don't own any business. So among family members, those who are most disadvantaged in their economic and social status, those who are the one that do the care. I think it's reasonable for the family survival to have someone that to take care of the family member, and other who work to get some financial support for the family. The question we have, the problem that we saw in a lot of cases is that at the beginning of the case, like when the parent immediately fell ill at the beginning of 6 months or a year, the financial support and other kind of support from the family member, from sibling, would be okay, still coming in, like transferring of money, getting support, material support, and so on and so forth. But after a while, a year or 2 or 3 years into the caring process, this start to disappear. And the family members that are those who are taking care of their parent have very little power to say anything. Like if they want to say, now I really need more money to buy anything like disposable diapers, for instance, they would be talked back from their own family member that, wow, you are using a lot of money these days, something like this. So this creates a situation of dependent of the caregivers to other family member too. So my idea of this is that because our long-term care system, even though it started to develop and it seemed to be getting better in the rural area rather than in semi-urban or in Bangkok, without this kind of long-term care support where they also provide you with some form of respite care or caregivers, community caregivers coming to help out some of the burden. Without this kind of support, the family member really have to get together and have to really have frequent family meetings, frequent consultation with or without support from the professional caregivers who know more about the natural cause of diseases or the necessities of providing medications, the cost of the medication, and so on and so forth. So the family member, all of them have share the information that they need to make collective decisions about it. It's impossible to just depend on any single members of the family. อาจารย์สายพินครับ
Professor Kleinman, what about euthanasia as another alternative to care? Euthanasia.
Well, I think that is a profound question. Thank you, Professor Saipin. Professor Saipin was also one of my former students, and she always asked difficult questions when she was, So, well, there's no question about the fact that in many countries in the world that are resource rich, there's a pressure from families and individuals to be able to determine when they end their life, when life ends. That's strong in Europe, strong in the United States. It's coming in Asia, okay? So what do I think about that? Well, I'd like that for myself, okay? I'd like to say that I'm 83, I'm not afraid of dying, but I don't want to linger, as my wife, Joan, said. I don't want to be incapacitated. So I would like the right to say, yeah, this is a point that maybe it's time for me to end my life. How that works out is a bit complicated. Because if you look at families, you wouldn't want to have a situation where there was pressure on the elderly person to say, yes, I'll die now because it'll save the family's money. Okay? And I could see that pressure in many circumstances, especially where the relationships in families are not good. Okay? So somehow there has to be a law that permits decisions about end of life, but on the other hand, is careful, really careful about how that occurs. You don't want family pressure. You do not want excess medical action, okay? So, during the worst period of medicine in modern times, under the Nazis in Germany, they systematically killed the chronically mentally ill who were in hospitals, the children with disabilities, and people with long-term disabling chronic conditions. They just killed them all. And doctors did the killing. I don't know if people in the audience are aware, but when the SS ran the death camps, they medicalized all that. And the Zyklone B, which was the poisonous gas put into the death chambers, it was always the act of an SS doctor. It was the doctor who did that, who put the poisonous gas in. So we don't want anything like that in the future. And hence, we want doctors to have access to help patients end their life, but we want to control how medicine does this, because medicine has at times done this without the permission of patients and the like. And that still happens in my country today. Periodically we find out that nurses have killed the patients, or doctors have. There was no one there to control it, etc. So we've got to be careful. Whatever rules and policies are, they must be careful, but they should support the idea that the individual, in the context of their family, has the right to make a decision about no longer wanting to stay alive. This will be one of the great medical ethics questions. I feel this is why anthropology must be central to medical ethics. The way ethics is done today in many countries around the world is completely inappropriate in my view. It simply takes some high-level principles which sound good on paper, but which represent not only a Western bias, but a particular hyper-individualistic bias. So, and imposes that on people. So for example, I do a lot of research in China. When I go to a hospital to do research in China, to my surprise initially, now to my understanding, the ethical issues that are raised are exactly the same ones raised in America by the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. And the reason for that is that virtually all hospitals in China that want to do research have made themselves compliant with the NIH. Okay? I don't believe in the NIH's approach to ethics, which I find very simplistic, very regulatory, so that everything has to be documented, everything has to be written down. But if you actually look at the way it's done highly inappropriately. So in America, for example, we have the tyranny of medical knowledge now. And what I mean by that is that a doctor must read to the patient all the potential side effects of any treatment that's used, okay? I think that's the worst thing you can possibly do, because anyone, okay, reading a list of side effects of medicine would be scared to death, because medicines have side effects, but usually in very low numbers. But the government requires every one of them to be written down. So maybe for medicine X, 1 person in 1 million has died, okay, from it, or in 10 million has died. But nonetheless, they have to put down then that this may cause your death, okay? Patients hear this and they get frightened, very frightened. And so that's not the way to do medical ethics. Medical ethics should be done anthropologically in terms of moral experience, understanding where the family is, where the person is, where the doctors are, and helping mediate that. I think that's a great role in the future for anthropologists in medical ethics, working to make it happen appropriately in some way. So those are the concerns that I have. And I would just say one other thing. As someone who's worked in Asia for all my career, especially China, I believe in the Confucian idea that ethics is not just about principles, but about the cultivation of the moral person, okay? Moral cultivation. In American ethics has nothing to do with that, bioethics, nothing to do. It's only about the principles. In China, you still have the Confucian idea of the moral cultivation of the person, but in medical school, they don't do a good job of it. And as a result, they've had a terrible situation in which, in the absence of a medical legal system in China, you actually have families that attack the doctor and nurse, even kill them because of ethical problems or financial problems in the setting. The Chinese call this the Yiwan Guanxi Wunti, the problem in the doctor-patient relationship. And actually, you can do something in China that I don't know any other country in the world that has a system like this. It's called Yinao in Chinese. And it means that you can, if you're unhappy with what happened in the hospital, and if the hospital doesn't respond to you, since China lacks a medical legal system, you go out and you hire a medical mob, okay? And the medical mob comes to the hospital, they pay off the security guards, they take some stones, and they break a few windows, okay? And then the leaders of the hospital come down, and there's a negotiation that takes place. And it's turned on only one thing, not on what the issue is, not how to resolve it. It's only on finance. And it goes this way. The leader of the hospital says, how much do you want? The family says this, X number. The leader proposes Y. And then they make an agreement. The money goes to the mob. Half of it goes to the mob. Half goes to the family. That's a terrible, terrible system. So China has now developed a new system in which the local communist boss, the Shuji, the party secretary, brings the two parties together and says, you, how much are you willing to pay? And they say, X. You, how much would you accept? They say, Y. And then the boss says, okay, you pay them this amount. Okay, and that's it. That's also not a good system, okay? And to have. But the reason I'm raising ethics is your question is really basic to the anthropological moral concern that needs to be introduced into health ethics, but does not exist right now. And I don't see how we're going to deal with end-of-life decisions about the right to die unless this is anthropologically understandable and organized. And I think this is a great role in future for medical anthropology.
I would like to ask you two questions. One thing, as your doctor, you're a professor in medical anthropology, and you have written the book Illness Experiences, and you know what talking about the illness narrative. But since you are to be the caregiver for your loved wife for long, many years, what part of the what as a caregiver that transform you as a caregiver? I think that you are you are the medical doctor, you are what do you call professor, but as you are, and also you are the male too, right?
Yeah.
But I want to know your life experience when you become a caregiver. What part of things that change you or transform you to become, and you talk about the soul of care in like this. What thing that for us should learn from you from this part?
Okay, so
That
let me-
is
let-
one
yeah,
question.
let me respond to this
Yes.
first, because and then you can ask a second question. I want to, I'm 83. I can only remember one question at a time.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, well, I was a caregiver before I took care of my wife. I was a psychiatrist, and I had lots of patients, and so I knew something about care. But my wife had taken care of me for 36 years, okay? And I took care of her for 10 years, okay? She transformed me. The book is about her transformation of me. I came up, I told you I was wantonly careless when I was young. I came from a wealthy family, but I spent a lot of my time on the streets, okay? And when I was young, when I was 12 years of age, a man who was a recruiter for the mafia came up to me, and he put his arm in my hair and my shoulder, gave me a rub and said, "We've got our eyes on you. You're doing great. Keep going, okay? Keep going." This scared my family very much, okay? And so we moved to another area, okay, where I couldn't spend time on the streets getting into trouble. But my wife really remade me. I always had, well, I think Dr. Kamat and Dr. Saipin could speak to this. I always had a lot of energy, but I was very strong, maybe too strong in my manners. And my wife changed me, made me realize my own vulnerabilities and the need to be able to be softer, easier, more responsive to all the things I just mentioned here. And then I think it was the acts of actually doing the care. It was waking her up in the morning, taking her to the toilet, helping her in the toilet, washing her, dressing her, helping her eat by helping to feed her, going through all those acts in the course of the day made me a caregiver. Those are the acts of caregiving. And I think that it's the materiality of it, it's the embodiment of it that changes you. That's what I meant when I said it's not talking about it, it's the doing that changes you, that makes you a different kind of person. Yeah. So that's my answer. What was your second question?
The second question is talking about the palliative care. I think
Yeah.
that we talk about in Thailand now. We talk about what we have to have the long-term care, and we have a lot of to adopt the technology like assisted technology for life. And what part of the things that we have? This is the need of thing that for life. Another thing is what do you call it? It's harmful to our life too as a technology. So what do you think about when you're talking about technology for life?
Yeah.
For the end of life
Yeah.
care. So-
Okay. So let me try to look at two aspects of what is problematic in societies relating to palliative care. I want to use my example from China, if I can. So in Chinese society, you're not supposed to speak to the elderly who are dying about death, okay? And the Chinese term for this, 不好意思, means humiliating. You don't humiliate the elderly by talking about death. That becomes very problematic. It's very hard to do end-of-life care if you don't have advanced directives. And so what's happening in China today are all sorts of experiments with the elderly in talking to them about what kind of death they want, how they want to face death, and the like. And surprisingly, if you can get the elderly away from their adult children, you can talk to them about this. But when they're surrounded by their adult children, the adult children make it very difficult to talk to the elderly about these things. Nonetheless, each society is going to work out culturally a way of doing this. In Japanese society, where there's the same kind of Confucian concern, it's interesting. If you go to a cancer hospital in Japan, in some of them, the doctors tell the person, the elderly person, they have cancer. In some they don't, okay? And I was in one, a very impressive one in Osaka, where the doctors did not tell the elderly person that they had cancer. But if the elderly person asked the nurse would show from her facial features whether there was cancer or not. She might cry, the nurse might cry, indicating to the person, yeah, you have cancer, okay? If subtly done, very subtly done. I think that's important to take into account, that there are different ways of doing this. I think my country, again, with its hyper-individualism and complete commitment to a scientific view, does it the wrong way often. So I have a friend who developed leukemia, and I sent him to our best cancer specialist treating leukemia. This specialist not only treated leukemia, but he had the best results in the United States for treating leukemia patients. And after one meeting with this specialist, my friend called me and said, I can't meet with him again. You have to find somebody else. And I said, no, he's the best. Why can't you meet with him again? And he said, he talked to me as if I were a machine. He gave me the odds of living and dying without any respect, without any care, without any attention to what I was thinking, as if I was just in a statistics course, and he was giving me a statistical analysis. This was about my life. This was my life. And he was telling me this as if it were an abstract statistics, okay? I felt it was done completely inhuman. It was inhuman. And I've heard that from many people, that we're not doing a good job on this. We're saying too much that patients can't take into account. We're saying it too coldly, without support, as if patients were scientists making a choice in this regard. They're not. So I think that how we do this is important. In China, they have additional problem I mentioned yesterday, which is they're so concerned about substance use that they make it very difficult to use morphine at end of life. You can't have palliative care without controlling pain. If there's no pain control, there's no palliative care. So how to do that in China is what we're working on, and here's where technology, here's an example of a technology. So our experts are working with Chinese experts around not just medical experts working together, but our engineers working with Chinese electrical engineers to figure out what's known as a virtual lock box. A virtual lock box is created with software on the internet in such a way that you actually put the morphine virtually into the lockbox, and then everyone can see that it's the doctor who goes in, takes it out, and gives it to the patient. Okay? It's all done in virtual space, while it's done in reality. So that's a good example of where technology can also be useful in that. Or, for example, what the terminology that Professor Komat used, biodegradable diapers for adults. Okay, that's a big. We're working on that too, so that it doesn't pollute the environment and create problems for communities that way. You can think of all kinds of technologies that are useful, from the smartphone through, I'm sure that your people are involved in this. Let me tell you about the one that was most impressive for me for dementia. There's a woman at the University of New South Wales in Australia whose name is Jill Bennett. Jill Bennett. She doesn't come out of medicine and she doesn't come out of social science. She comes out of the arts. She comes out of design and the arts. And she works with patients with dementia and has developed VR, virtual reality, and AI. And what she does is, for each patient with dementia, she builds their life story into the virtual reality and the AI. And then when they put the goggles on, they go back to very safe places in their life that often calm people who have become anxious, develop a lot of anxiety from their dementia, maybe paranoid. It helps with paranoia, with anxiety, with depression. And you change the story going forward in a way that makes it more comprehensible to the person, more helpful, etc. It's very impressive, very impressive. You need obviously to have resources to do this, so I don't know whether this is going to be appropriate for the poor. But I can tell you for middle-class people over the next decade who are having dementia in the family, you're going to see a lot of uses like this.
Thank you. I think the idea of technology as dehumanizing care is also need to be further problematized because we are indeed in need of some form of materiality and technologies to support the process of providing humane care. So, yes, Chachon, please.
Hi, Professor. According to your talk yesterday and today and your writing, I think the one core element of care is present, right? So my question is, how can present be taught in the medical school of for a medical practitioner? It is the first question. And the second, but it related to the first question.
Okay.
And secondly, how anthropology or doing ethnography can make some contribution to this mission or this task.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, I don't think we teach presence, okay? Presence is a native ability in every society to be a human being with another human being, to be there in a lively fashion. For young people like yourself, I like to say that presence is when you fall in love with someone, okay? And you don't act passive or in a mechanical way. You act in a lively way, okay, with them. That's presence, okay? Presence, the negative side of presence is when you're with your parents and you get angry at them, okay? So you want presence in the positive sense. And I think that we all have that skill. The issue is what prevents it from being there. And I think number one is a bureaucratic system that emphasizes throughput, time spent, and doesn't give you the time to be present, okay? And makes demands on you. Like, for example, in my country, probably the biggest failure in technology has been the electronic health record, which is so complicated because it was created by electrical engineers who knew nothing about healthcare, not by clinicians. And it's so complicated to use, at least the systems we're using in Boston, that they are regarded by doctors as terrible. And one of the results of them is that when you go to see your doctor in Boston, often she has her back turned to you. She's trying to figure out what's on the computer screen in order to understand, well, what's your blood pressure in the past? What were your x-rays? What's your electrolytes, et cetera? that's not a good way to begin. So it seems to me that you want to begin with presence. You want to emphasize presence. This is my point about care. You want to make care the central thing. Okay, if care is going to be the central thing, you want to be able to measure things, take presence apart and measure it a bit, like seeing someone showing respect, okay? You want to see presence with respect, not presence with disrespect, okay? You want to see presence with good communication, okay? Not poor communication. You want to see presence as a, you know, it's interesting, I don't know what terms you use in Thai. In Chinese society, they're very aware of presence, and for children who really have presence, they call shining. Someone is shining. There's a light that comes, you know, with them. They're shining. They're bright. They're. It's as if the sunlight comes with them, okay, into a room. It's actually associated in the Chinese mentality with qi, with that vital essence coming out, okay? And they compliment students on being shining, okay? And actually, as you advance in Chinese society, that's deeply regarded as very, very powerful, that ability to shine, okay? And so we want to encourage that. I don't think we need to teach it. We need to encourage it, not discourage it. But what's happening, it's being discouraged, okay? Part of the discouragement may be even personal. Let's be honest about it. If you're a young doctor, you're facing some difficulties. You're seeing people die for the first time. You're with other people suffering. You protect yourself. I showed a picture yesterday of Picasso's painting of the head of a medical student with one eye shut to protect you, okay? But you don't want both eyes shut, okay? You want, hopefully, both eyes open, that you respond to others. So I think it can be done. And I think that the technology actually can help with that. Excuse me. Technology can actually help with that, with the presence. First of all, by opening up a space of time for doctors and nurses to really be with patients, okay? It doesn't have to be a long period of time. In my country, we used to say that about 12 minutes was a sufficient time, 12 to 15 minutes, for the doctor-patient, ordinary doctor-patient relationship, not obviously in a catastrophe or something. But you need a little bit of time. And in that time, you can accomplish a lot. And the first thing comes from your presence. Now, what's the role of anthropology? You added for that, or ethnography. I really think ethnography has a great role in this regard, because presence is part of what makes an ethnographer really effective. It's your presence with others, your ability to make them feel comfortable, to feel that you're a real person, that they can talk to you, that you respect them, that, you know, you're lively and fun to be with, okay? I think that anthropologists can help point out what's happening to doctors and nurses so that they are being de-skilled. Maybe de-skilled is the wrong term, even. They're being dehumanized. They're losing their presence. And I think that ethnographers can help with that and help to build into the care certain things. I believe that the mini ethnography is very important. Teaching young doctors how to do a little ethnography around the illness experience. I call it a mini ethnography. It's not a real ethnography, but it's a mini ethnography. How to do that is very important. I also think that presence is important not just in medicine. It's important in education. It's important even in the policy domain, okay, where the ability to convey policy ideas comes out of your ability to convey ideas to others. You know, I don't know how your system of governance works. In the United States, when a policymaker at the political level wants to advance a change, they begin with the quantitative data. They tell you the quantitative data that supports a change, but they never end that way, okay? They then tell a story, a particular story about someone, usually one of their constituents, to illustrate the quantitative data. And when they tell that story, they change. When they present the quantitative data, they're kind of mechanical. As soon as they tell the personal story, they become lively and present. And that is often what is convincing in a political debate, is when you see that, okay? You know, we can use an example of it. Biden, the other day, in the debate, wasn't present, okay? Whereas Trump, I dislike Trump, you can know it, but nonetheless, Trump has got a lot of presence, okay? He's got a lot of presence, and I think people saw that difference, and so at every level, I think it's important.
You, Professor.
Thank you. I'm very excited. I'm a fourth-year medical student from Chiang Mai, and now I'm trying to take a daily note in medical school as much as I can. And this time I want to share with you about the experience in Thai medical school and want you to give me some advice. As a medical student, I think there are lots of cultural issue and doctrine issue in the medical school about the culture of the culture of slender hierarchy, the long working time under the devoting sacrifice ideology. Under the creed of the code of loyal man who is the father of medicine in Thailand, and I got lots of doctrine which I think that is a problem in medical school that cultivate us. Sometimes we are taught to work quickly because we don't have enough time, and that's why some question that I ask to the patient, it might be useless for my professor. Sometimes we are taught to hate the universal coverage of the people, and sometimes I go to the clinical rounding daily, and I talk with my patients about they are refugees from Myanmar. Sometimes I want to talk with them about how they come across the border, and sometimes the story is the gossip in the hospital that the caregiver of the patients, they walk around the ward and try to find some answer for some question, and lots of doctor, lots of my senior, they don't want to talk with the caregiver. And yeah, and sometimes I saw doctor shout at patient. Sometimes in medicine we got principle of the checking in orientation to place, time, and person, right? And sometimes patients try to say something, but they are ignored since the doctor check that they are not oriented, and sometimes I am the one who get back to the patients and talk with them later. During the community medicine class, once we talk about the problem of pesticide and chemical in agricultural area that affect the health of people, and I come with the topic of the problem of contract farming, and I am ignore and professor and my friend try to blame me that I got lots of information that looks not medical. Yeah, and yeah, that's why I think we got lots of issue that we are facing, and under the rationalization of capitalism, I think that make us to be a doctor who is just a human labor mechanic who fix the people and send them back to the bad to the social factory. And under the ideology of neoliberalism, sometimes we are facing the problem that majority of the new generation doctor, many of them choose resigning from the public hospital later and then go to the private hospital or aesthetic industry. And I think I want you to give some advice that how can we overcome this kind of context and reclaim the value of medicine in Thai context. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know anything about Thai context. I mentioned this the other day to some people. I've been here 3 days, okay? So the best I could do would say, let me tell you about Thailand yesterday, today, and tomorrow. But I don't know anything, so I can't answer that. But I can say that you're doing good. You're becoming a medical anthropologist. Yeah? And the idea is to keep going, okay? That's really important advice. Keep going. Don't stop. Keep going, okay? Do what you need to do to move yourself forward. But you've got all the values, you've got the critique, and you can put it into action. There's a big literature in medicine in response to this. Take a look even at an old piece by me and Pete Benson called Anthropology in the Clinic in PLOS Med some years ago, which lays out what doctors can do in the clinic that's useful. You know, everything has got to be balanced, okay? If a patient comes to you and they're bleeding, okay? They're bleeding. You don't say to them, okay, tell me your story, okay? You stop the bleeding. You stop the bleeding. And so everything has got to be in balance. There's a time for you to get involved with the issue of pesticides and their effect on contract laborers. But it may not be in the context of the doctor-patient relationship for a specific person with that problem. It might be seeing a number of such patients, writing a paper about it, and dealing with the policymakers on this score. So you've got to be able to do things in a balanced way in different settings. But you've got the soul of medical anthropology, okay? What you just said is what it's about, yeah.
So thank you so much, Professor, for this fruitful discussion. And I would also like to thank you, Dr. Gomat-Sab as well, for being a moderator. So for anyone who is interested in buying the book, you can go to the 4th floor. And the book looks like this. This is an example. So yeah, the 4th floor is where the book is sold. Okay. Ha. Yeah. So, and if you wish to have an autograph of Professor Kleinman, yeah, you can meet him. So, ค่ะก็ต้องขอจบการประชุมแต่เพียงเท่านี้นะคะ